Hi, my name is Simon Dawson. Welcome to my Switching View YouTube channel, and to this, the third of three introductory videos in this series I'm calling Intermediate Types. In these three videos, I'm describing the work of a guy called Edward Carpenter and his ideas on how best to study the history of people we might now label LGBTQIA, or what Carpenter called intermediate types. Carpenter's thesis was simply that if you study such people inside the sphere and influence of Christianity, then any study will be distorted by prejudice and discrimination. The best thing to do is to look across the world in cultures before colonialism got there to export Christianity, or look at cultures back in classical times before Christianity came into being. And if you do that, Carpenter found you get a very different set of answers as to how such intermediate type people existed in the world and are perceived by other people. Often in many cultures and across hundreds, if not thousands of years, such people were accepted as being perfectly normal and often valued for what they gave to their societies. And often they were valued for two areas in particular, in religion and warfare, what I'm calling queer ministry and warrior love. But if my thesis is right, and that across the world and across thousands of years, these intermediate type people were accepted and often valued for what they brought to the cultures they lived within, that leaves the question of what went wrong. Why are things so different nowadays? And again, in these videos, I'll be hopefully providing enough evidence to persuade you that a large part of the responsibility is down to the actions and teachings of the Christian Church. I agree, it's not only the church that was responsible for this suppression. Yes, if you look in history, there were cultures, often those that were more patriarchal in nature, where there was some prejudice against intermediate type people, often prejudice to be found in the more elite male cultures. But if you look carefully in those cultures, there were other subcultures where it was possible for intermediate type people to exist fairly openly and happily, often in subcultures somewhere around the domain of religion. It was only when the church came on the scene, and for some reason the church developed a teaching about homosexuality and intermediate type people, which is much more total and much more violent in its attack, that thing was changed. And there were two main waves of suppression. Firstly, once the church gained state power after Constantine in the 4th, 5th and 6th centuries AD, this suppression carried on through the late Roman Empire in Europe and the Middle East. And then 1,000 years later, as European colonial project came into being, this carried with it Christian teaching and doctrine right across the world. And this anti-homosexual, anti-intermediate type culture was imposed by force. Sometimes it was the church that was directly responsible. Sometimes other people, teachers, soldiers, government leaders, and so on, who were inspired, acting independently, but inspired by their own Christian teachings and faith. Again, I've only got time to give a few short examples in this video, but I'll be going into this in great detail in later videos. You cannot understand the history of homosexuality in the world without understanding what happened in the colonial project over 500 years all over the world. Let's start with this quote taken from Carpenter's Intermediate Types. It has to be said that Carpenter didn't really understand this colonial issue. Living as he did, late Victorian, early part of the 20th century, that was the height of the British imperial project, and he was too close to it to understand what was going on. It's only 100 years later that we have that necessary critical distance. Nevertheless, this quote is in Carpenter's book. This is Panama, Colombia, early part of the 16th century, with the conquistadors from Spain going into America. The spectacle of the men disguised as women surprised the Europeans who first landed in America. They concluded that these were folk in whom the two sexes were conjoined. Our old records always termed them hermaphrodites. And this is a pretty typical report that we've seen quite a few of earlier in this video. But it then goes on to say this. They invented every possible charge against them, and these imaginations inflamed the zeal of Vasco Nunes de Balboa, the Spanish captain who first discovered the Southern Sea, to such an extent that he destroyed numbers of them by letting loose upon them those savage dogs of whom his compatriots indeed made use for the purpose of exterminating a large proportion of the Indians. And here we have the sort of attack by colonial people on indigenous people, which started to wipe out these histories of intermediate type people. This story became quite infamous back in Spain. This is a quite well-known print. Balboa feeding several Indians who had committed the terrible sin of sodomy to the dogs to have them torn to pieces. Theodore de Bry, 1594. It was important to look back at that quote carefully. It wasn't just these intermediate type people, these hermaphrodites, that were attacked by dogs. His compatriots indeed made use for the purpose of exterminating a large proportion of the Indians. This was equal opportunities genocide. Everybody was intact, although maybe those who were, quote, hermaphrodites got a bit more savagery. And that's the issue with colonialism. In the UK, colonialism is slavery, and slavery is colonialism, and that's the only thing we see about the colonial project. But it was much wider than that. And people living in ex-colonial countries will tell you the effects are much more widespread and insidious. There's the theft of land, wealth, cultural artifacts. And the theft of land is particularly pernicious. There are many countries where the land use patterns today go back to the colonial theft of land 300 or 400 years ago. There's the issue of disease. The colonial people took with them diseases such as influenza or whatever, and even the problems of famine. But then the issues of genocide. Are there actual genocide where the populations are killed deliberately, or cultural genocide where, although the indigenous peoples remain alive, their culture is taken from them and a new culture, often a Christian culture, is imposed forcibly in its stead? And it's this cultural genocide which has been the major effect of colonialism across the world. Just to give one example, India, 19th century, the Church of England published a teaching document on homosexuality and the wider LGBTQ issues a few years ago. And in that teaching document, talking about the history of this issue, it described in India how the Hindu culture was well known for its widespread acceptance and of gender diversity, both in the gods and in the people serving the gods. It then went on to say this: official attitudes hardened under British rule. The Indian Penal Code, for example, which made carnal knowledge against the order of nature a crime, was introduced in 1860 and applied over time to colonies in East Africa and Malaysia. And so laws came in, introduced by the British colonial power, to clamp down on any expressions of diverse sexuality. Today, the report says 40 Commonwealth countries and 70 countries in total have laws that criminalise homosexuality. And for myself, as a gay man who is British, I find it quite shocking and shameful that over half the countries in the world where they have laws against homosexuality, those laws are as a direct result of British colonial experience in the past. The other way in which intermediate type people across the world were suppressed by the effects of colonialism were in various church-run mission schools, which were widespread across the colonial system from the 17th century right up until almost the present day. It's not just that these schools taught Christian doctrine and maths and English and so on. They also often enforced a patriarchal heteronormativity in their entire lifestyle on these children. And so the children became distanced and ashamed of the lifestyles and culture of their parents, and in particular, quite often distanced from and ashamed of the expressions of intermediate type culture and behaviour in their parents' culture. In Canada, these schools are particularly well documented. So I'll just talk through what happened in Canada as an example. In the Canadian Indian Acts of the 1880s, these church schools became institutionalized. It became a legal requirement for the children of Indigenous people to attend these schools, and the running of the schools was outsourced to the Christian church. The schools ran, as I said, until the 1990s. As part of the wider safeguarding scandals in the church, there were serious complaints about abuse within these schools, and a major government inquiry was set up. And the report came back with two findings. Firstly, seriously criticising the idea of basically cultural genocide, taking these children and enforcing a different culture, but also seriously criticising the sexual, emotional and physical abuse that was widespread across these schools. As a result of that, the Pope actually travelled to Canada, as did Archbishop Justin Welby of the Anglican Church, to formally apologise for the role of the church in the widespread abuse carried out by church workers on these Indigenous children and their families. And this is what the Pope said, flying back from Canada to Italy, when questioned by newspaper reporters why he didn't use the word genocide. Taking away children, changing culture, changing mentality, changing traditions, changing a race. Let's put it that way, an entire culture. Yes, genocide is a technical word. I didn't use it because it didn't come to my mind, but I described it. Yes, it's genocide. You can all stay calm about this. You can report that I said that it was genocide. Canada is a good place to study the effects of colonialism on intermediate type people, because things are very well documented by some very good government work. For example, I'll link you to this report, An Introduction to the Health of Two-Spirit People, Historical, Contemporary and Emergent Issues. This is a report by an official government health board. Two-Spirit is the phraseology that Canadian Indigenous people have chosen to apply to themselves. Like intermediate type, it's a wide category which includes LGBTQIA, but does not define things too closely. The report makes an excellent and very readable case study of how colonialism may affect an Indigenous culture, and in particular affects the two-spirit or intermediate type people within it. The report firstly describes how these two-spirit peoples fitted within their culture before colonialism. It then describes the effect of colonialism, and then describes in quite some detail their legacy carried on today. Sadly, because damaged people may become damaged or damaging parents, these effects cascade down the generations. And although the schools may have closed a few decades ago, the health effects are still ongoing today. And although the health effects may damage the entire community, the report describes how two-spirit people in particular are more seriously affected. And it says that these effects may take generations to resolve. I've not got time to go into detail here, but I would recommend that you might want to read the report. It is excellent. Before I sign off this third video, there's a couple of points I want to make. Firstly, you may have noticed I have been deeply critical of the Christian Church. Well, I hope it's not simply a gratuitous attack. I plan to be objective, to cite high-quality sources giving evidence where I make a criticism, and to list those sources for you to read for yourself. And as you've seen, I can cite evidence up to including Pope Francis himself criticising his own church. But also, I have a Christian faith myself. In the past, I have been a licensed lay minister in the Church of England. And although I've resigned that, I now teach and preach on this YouTube video. My aim is for the church to do better. But the church has done hugely wrong in the past, making catastrophic mistakes. And only by learning from those mistakes can it do better in the future. And that's what I wanted to do, describe those mistakes so the church can do better in the future. The other point I need to make is that the study of LGBTQIA issues is hugely complex and hugely contested. In these introductory videos, I've given you a few brief snippets of examples, but there's so much that I'm having to leave out, and that's just a sad fact of what I can do in these videos. I will go into more structured detail in the later videos, but even then, it will only be scratching the surface. I'm not trying to teach you in these videos so much as to inspire you to go off for yourself, to do your own exploring, your own learning, your own reading, to find out for yourself a bit more about this whole history of LGBTQIA people and the church. And with that in mind, let's go back to that first slide I produced in the first video about the underside of history. Who is permitted to have a history and who is not is a vital issue. Recorded history, imposed from above, is controlled history, beyond whose boundaries are silence and darkness. Those who have no memories or story have no life. And this is the issue I've been exploring in these 3 videos. Recorded history, imposed from above, has been imposed for so often under the influence of the Christian Church and its teachings. And for those of us who are LGBTQIA, our memories, our stories, and our lives have been influenced and damaged and distorted. However, if we can learn to tell our stories from the underside of history, we can change that. We can recover our lost memories. We can recover our fuller and truer and more complete stories. And if we can do that, we who are LGBTQIA can lead fuller and more authentic lives. And if these videos help anybody make a start in moving in that direction, then that's all I can hope to do. So we've come to the end of the video. I hope you've enjoyed it and found it interesting and useful. If you go to the switchingview.com website, you'll find some web pages created to support my YouTube channel. On the website, you'll find a schedule of every video I have uploaded or plan to upload, with details of what's within each video. Also, there's what I call text and resources documents. I give a lot of detail in these videos, and in these text and resources documents, I list all the evidence to support what I've said, and also quite a lot of information and advice for further reading if you want to follow things up. Mostly where I can, I've listed easily available documents, books, newspaper articles, websites, to make it easy for you to find stuff, rather than articles locked away in university libraries. For the YouTube channel, as always, if you click on this subscribe button and the little bell icon, each time I upload a video, you'll get sent an email letting you know that it's there. And finally, I'm going to ask you a favour. I put a lot of work into making these videos, and I want them to be seen by the largest number of people. So if you have any friends or contacts you think might appreciate these videos, please do tell your friends. Please do spread the word. And that's all for now. Thank you.